Thanks very much. Very pleased to be here speaking. I'm a member of the NUT's National Executive. I'm also the NUT Branch Secretary for Tower Hamlets. What I want to talk about is what is happening next week, and in 5 minutes just try and explain the importance of pensions to us as public sector workers, but also where we think it links in with what's been happening with the anti-cuts movement. Before Christmas, we had the students who lit a beacon, I think, for everybody who wanted to stand up against this government and their cuts agenda. And then in March, we had the biggest demonstration in this country, organised by trade unions that this country's seen for nearly 100 years. 500,000 people on the streets protesting, saying that they weren't going to accept the government's austerity measures and that there was an alternative. And we always knew that couldn't be the end, that couldn't be the high watermark of the movement against the cuts. And I think what is going to happen next week is the next phase, the opening up of the next phase of the anti-cuts movement. Next Thursday, June the 30th, nearly 800,000 public sector workers in 4 different unions, 3 of them teacher unions, 1 of them a civil service union, will be taking strike action for 1 day, but for what is planned to be the first of more strikes if we don't get the government to back down on their proposals. Now, the strike is against the changes the government want to make to our pension scheme, and if you're not in the public sector, that may seem a little bit esoteric and it may seem a little bit selfish of us. So I just want to explain what the government's trying to do, and then to say some of the cases we're making about where we think the real pensions crisis lie. What the government want all public sector workers to do is 3 things. They want us to pay more towards our pension, 50% more every month. They want us to work longer before we get our pension, and they want us to get a smaller pension when we eventually do get to retire. There's lots of detail I could go into, but to put it into sharp focus, I'll use myself as an example. I'm 51 years old, I've been teaching for 26 years, and at the moment I can retire at 60. The 3 things the government want to do: they want me to pay an extra £120 a month towards my pension. They announced this just after they said we would have a 2-year pay freeze. Instead of retiring at 60, they want to raise my retirement age to 67. And believe you me, if you saw me teaching now, teaching at 67 isn't going to be a very pretty sight. And then when I do retire, my pension, the calculations they will base my pension on, will rob me of about £200,000 over a retirement. If I'm retired for 20 years, I will lose about £200,000 out of my pension over those 25 years. Now, clearly public sector workers feel that we can't accept that. We can't accept the pay more, we can't accept the work longer, we can't accept the get less. Particularly, and this is very important that we get this message across to people, our pension schemes are not unaffordable and they are not in crisis. The teacher pension scheme and most public sector pension schemes were valued about 5 years ago. Changes were agreed to those pension schemes at that time, and the effect of those changes is to reduce the costs. Costs to our pension scheme are falling, and the Government Audit Commission says that the teacher pension scheme has still got long-term affordability in it. There's no hole in our pension scheme. It is what they call balanced. So the money they want to take off me, £120 every month, and off every teacher in the country, isn't to go into our pension scheme. It's to go into the Treasury to pay off the deficit. So there's one example of another group of workers being made to pay for the deficit. Now, I know I'm going to get told to finish in a minute, so what the government are trying to do is to create a divide between public sector workers and private sector workers. They're trying to say, these are greedy public sector workers, you've got very good pensions, private sector workers haven't got very good pensions, so the answer is to take away your pension. The changes they want to make to our pensions won't financially benefit one single worker in the private sector. There is a pensions crisis in this country. The pensions crisis is the millions of pensioners living in poverty on the state pension, and the millions of private sector workers who don't have access to an occupational pension scheme. There are lots of countries in Europe who force private sector employers to have an occupational pension scheme that they pay into and that the employees pay into. But the Thatcher government 20 years ago took that condition away. So that's the crisis. What we will be saying next week is don't attack the public sector pension, raise the private sector pension. And David Cameron made a disgraceful comment a couple of weeks ago. He said there is a pensions apartheid in Britain. A pensions apartheid. And he said the pensions apartheid is that public sector workers get a good pension and private sector workers get a bad pension. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in apartheid South Africa, the black people who were rising up against oppression wanted to improve things for themselves. You know, they wanted to lift people's aspirations, not drag everybody else down. So to use that kind of terminology, I think, is really disgraceful. Now, very quickly about the significance of next week. There are 3 unions taking action next week who have taken strike action before. You might expect them to take strike action. The PCS have had 6 national ballots for action, the NUT and the UCU, the college union. 2 significant things about next week. One is there's a union called the Association of Teachers and Lecturers. It's sometimes called the No Strike Union or the Moderate Union. That's because they've never taken national strike action before. That union, 80% of their members voted to take strike action for the first time next week. So that indicates to you, to us, that the government hasn't won the argument amongst the most moderate layer of public sector workers. Something else happened last week that for us is just gold dust. When we announced the strikes last week, Danny Alexander, the Lib Dem Treasury spokesperson who's leading the talks for the government, and the talks are going nowhere. You know, the government isn't negotiating on any of this. They've taken nothing off the table, even though we're still in negotiations with them. He came out and said, you can't strike whilst we're still negotiating, that's irresponsible. And then he said, the negotiations are still going on, but the government isn't changing its mind on any of it. So that tells you where the negotiations are going. Within an hour of him making that statement, the union that represents head teachers unanimously voted that they will ballot their members for strike action next term. A union, again, that has never balloted for strike action in the past. Again, showing you that they haven't won the argument that we have to pay more, work longer, and get less. So our message to you today is please support the strikes next week. You will have friends who work in the public sector. You will know people who work in the public sector. Talk to them about it and get more detail. Do support the strikes next week. Don't believe the lies that the government tell you about the affordability of our pensions. Come on the demonstrations that we're organising in central London on the day, and we can give you more details of that later. And do join the fight for decent pensions for everybody. I'm going to sum up, but I just want to share something with you that gives me confidence that we are doing the right thing, that we can win support, and that we are in the mainstream of some anti-cuts activity. And this may seem a bit bizarre. An email I received last week, on Monday, that was sent to every NUT branch secretary in the country. It's called Strike the Right Note, from a company called ADS. Pleased to agree special prices for trade unions and their members on megaphones and loud hailers. This means your voice can be clearly heard by large crowds and is ideal for campaigning, demonstrations and rallies. This offer is only available up to the 30th of June 2011. To take advantage of these special offers, use the discount code TRADEUNION. There you are. Some bright spark is looking at what we're doing, and they really don't miss a trick, do they? But we will be making a noise, whether it's with these loud hailers or not, next week. It will be the part of further action and even bigger actions in the autumn term to defend public sector pensions, but also to say, let's have decent state pension, decent private sector pension for all workers. That's where the pension crisis lies. Thanks very much. I think this has been a very, very good meeting, and there are lots of meetings taking place under different umbrellas all the time, and I think it's important that they continue to do so. We are in the fight of our lives. You know, we are facing a government, and you know, people like us are facing governments all over Europe and all over the world that want to privatise, that want to cut, that want to put us down and take away everything we fought and everything we've got. We fought for. You know, it wasn't given to us because people were kind to us. It's because our side fought for it. That's the history we have to learn. I had, in the time I came to speak about pensions, but I welcome the contributions that people have made that have widened it out, because I think we do have to join up the dots and look at where things link up. So Liam's contribution about academies, Amanda's about the anti-cuts movement, and then the contributions from the floor. I think the sister who's just spoken, I think, has summed it up very well about what is our vision for society. But I just want to finish on the strikes and why I think it's important that meetings like this do support it. The latest public opinion polls show that opinion is divided roughly equally between public support for the strikes next week and public opposition to them. Now, if we're going to win, if we're going to win, and I think if the public sector workers win on pensions, then everybody should see it as something that benefits our movement. If we're going to win, we've got to shift that public opinion. I come to lots of meetings like this, I speak at lots of meetings like this, and we convince ourselves in halls like this that everybody's really up for it, and all we have to do is just make greater demands for more, bigger, better strikes. I like going on strike because it's an attempt, people like me like strikes because you organise, you see the strength of the movement. But believe me, most of the teachers I'm speaking to don't want to go on strike next week. They're quite scared of it. They're quite scared of taking on the government. They're not going on strike because they love it. They're going on strike because they think they've got no choice, and they're following the leadership that has been given by our union. And we have to remember that, when we talk about giving solidarity, because that will be important to those people. Those people have to feel confident that they're not on their own, that they're striking with the support of the wider public. And above all, our side needs a victory at the moment. And I think we are getting small victories, but we need a big one. And this, we hope, will be a big one, because if we don't win it, that's a setback for us. The last thing I'll say is it is interesting. You look at David Cameron, you look at the way he's manipulating the government at the moment. What he seems to do is push the Lib Dems forward on things that he thinks might be unpopular and stay out of it. The health service, he didn't intervene in the flagship policy of the health service. He let Andrew Lansley and he let the Lib Dems get on with it for a little bit. And then when it looked like public opinion was going, he stepped in and said, oh, well, of course we can change a few things, we'll pause and engage. The interesting thing about the pensions dispute is Cameron and Osborne have said nothing yet. They've said nothing. If they really thought that they could force it through without a fight or make us roll over, they would be in here now saying, this is essential, we're going to steamroll it. What they've done is push the Lib Dems forward and push Danny Alexander, saying, well, he's entitled to his opinion. So we see a chink there, the fact that Cameron hasn't come in behind it yet. He will at some point. So it is important that the strikes are big next week. It is important that we remember that people are a little bit scared about it. And then whatever you can do to build it, not necessarily, you don't have to come on the demonstrations, but talk to people. If you've got kids in schools, talk to your teachers about it. Show them that you support it. Because if they feel confident they've got support, then the strikes will get bigger and the chances to win will be greater. Thanks.